Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Many years ago, at a Sunday morning church service, I was listening to my priest who was starting his sermon. He said, "I have a deep love for God. I have a deep belief in Jesus Christ. It's Christians that I don't like." And just like you, we all began to laugh and a little bit shocked by the beginning of his sermon. And we thought it was kind of funny because he was a funny guy. We knew that he loved us so much, but it was kind of like, wow, okay. So we all cracked up. But suddenly reality was starting to set in. And he wasn't telling a joke. He was telling his own story. He was telling us of how trying to come to church as a young adult, that he felt that he was being pushed away, or the way some people were treating him and seeing how they treat others turned him off. And so he knew he had a longer journey to head on, because he was just a little bit hurt of the way that many Christians can behave. He said, like many people, he thought the church was supposed to be a loving place, with loving people, loving words, loving attitudes, and loving welcomes. After all, he said, as the famous song sings, "They will know that we are Christians by our love." I have often thought about that sermon from time to time. For me, it woke me up, and it now gives me a kind of a checklist every once in a while of rechecking myself to make sure how I'm doing. Many times I fail, I'm a sinner, and I will go down, but I will check and try to improve myself wherever I can. I ask questions like, how am I to act? How am I supposed to treat others? How do others see me as a Christian? And do my actions matter? I think all of us as Christians should ask ourselves these questions from time to time. But truthfully, I think we all know the answer. We all have stories of Christians that have done things to us. Things that you may have been that little jab or the gossip thing, or someone has hurt you in a way that maybe you haven't gone to church in a while. After all, as I tell my class, many times in my career, and the preacher was talking about the same thing, is not finding people who don't know Jesus Christ, but it's bringing them back to church because they've been injured in some way in the past. And so this is what he was talking about. Things like rude behavior at times, or dealing with the gossip in the church, or dealing with the silent treatments that sometimes people can give one another, or maybe one is angered at another and they need to just show that. Don't you remember the story I've told a few times, because I think it's quite hilarious, about the guy who was behind me on the highway? I still to this day don't know what I did to him. But all I know is he came up to the side of me, rolled down his window, and gave me the finger. And then when I turned and he saw my collar, he turned white, realizing he just pissed off a priest. So he did what the only thing he thought he could do was he hit the gas to go a little faster. And to my delight and laughter, there were several Jesus bumper stickers on the back of his car. And I thought to myself, what does that tell people who are trying to come to the church? The truth is, like my priest, we all want to be loved, and that was his point. In the world, but especially in the church. Because we all have expectations, and if you think about it, we do have expectations of how we should be treating each other in the church. Think about it. How many times in our vocabulary we said, well, that wasn't very godly, or that wasn't very Christian, or they sure weren't acting very Christian to that person. You see, it's even in our vocabulary. Because what we know is that it's supposed to be about love. We know that. Love is vital. Love is wanted by each and every one of us. Love is needed for each and every one of us. And the truth is, love is godly. This may not sound like a big deal to some, and it may even sound petty to some. But not sharing love with others is actually a big deal. That's right. not sharing the love of God with others is actually a big deal. So let's dig in and see why it's so important to share love as a follower of Christ. In the gospel today, we find Jesus with his disciples at the Last Supper. It says that Judas now gets up and he leaves to betray Jesus, so Jesus knows his time has come. And Jesus begins to give his final instructions to his disciples that will go on for quite a while. I've often thought about Jesus kind of when I used to go on a trip and we left the girls there for a little while, or we're going out for the night and tell them, remember to lock the door, remember to feed the dog, remember to turn on the porch light, remember, and all those little lists of things that you tell your children. This is kind of in a way what you're seeing Jesus doing, is giving them final instructions because he's getting ready to go, and he knows that. They're up in the upper room, and there he's giving his children, the people he loves so much, their final instructions before he's arrested. But the first thing he wants them to understand is about love and loving our neighbor. In the book of John, it says, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from the world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Jesus says to them, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you are to show one another love. By this love, everyone will know that you are my disciple if you love one another. There is actually nothing original or brand new in these words. The theme to love one another goes back much, much further than Jesus himself. It is one of the themes that is cited again and again throughout the Old Testament. But Jesus makes it into a commandment along with worshiping God. In other words, what Jesus is doing is like taking maybe if you have a glass and there's a little bit of oil in the bottom, he's raising those words throughout the Old Testament of love and bringing them to the top. Worship the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. He's bringing it to the top because it's that important. Why? Because God is all-loving. God is love. He wants his disciples to love others, to show the world that they are in fact his disciples. And they will be identified by love, showing that love. What Jesus wants them to do is to continue the love that Jesus had for them in this world. Jesus wants his followers to be known by their love of their neighbor. The commonly understood interpretation is that we should love others with the same measure that we love ourselves, which is certainly very true. But rabbis and biblical scholars have also understood that in the text of this particular verse, it can also be read and understood as love your neighbor who is like yourself. Let me explain. A neighbor who is like yourself doesn't mean that they have the same skin color, or the same nationality, or the same income level, or the same education, or the same neighborhood. What it means is that we love people because just like us, they are also broken, stressed, hurt, fearful, and we all fall short of God. However, just like you, they are a gift of God. They are children of God, and they also need the love of God. And Jesus knows this, and God in the flesh is delivering these words into the world. And it was the disciples who would soon go into the world to show the world the love of God. It would be their job. It will become their mission, and it will become who they are. But Jesus doesn't just tell them to love. Jesus is going even deeper in the meaning of love for each other. Jesus is not just telling us how to love. Jesus is showing us how to love. Even on the cross, he will show the disciples how to love. As when he's on the cross, he uses those famous words, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Think about it. On the cross, he uses these words. You do understand He's talking about all of us. Giving us the forgiveness of putting Him on that cross. That is ultimate love of Christ. Think about it. It is God who has come in the flesh of Jesus Christ and is teaching His followers how to love by example. Think about that for a moment, of God coming to the world, into our lives, to show us how to love one another. Jesus is giving us a commandment. A command, not a simple lesson, not a suggestion, but is giving the church a rule to live by. One that the disciples got to see firsthand for themselves. And they went out and they did it by teaching about Jesus Christ, but even more importantly, showing them what Jesus was like. Washing the feet, for example. So what about us? Do we as followers of Christ, children of the living God, show love to people in this world? Do we love our neighbors, all people, with the love that God has given us? You see, what Jesus is teaching His disciples and teaching us is that when we show love to others, what we are doing is glorifying Jesus. And when we glorify Jesus, we are in turn glorifying God in this world. This is why it's so important to show love to one another. Not gossip, not digs, not being mean, love. Why? Because it glorifies God in this world. Jesus is basically saying that if we truly love God, then we will love our neighbors. And if we love our neighbors, we then will love God. They are both very closely linked, but in each case, they radiate love. 1 John 4:7 tells us to love one another. For it is of God. And because God is love, we as the children of God must share that love with each other. This is why we work so hard to share our love with each other and our community here at Holy Trinity by the Lake. It's not to look good or for just people just to know our name. No, it's because it glorifies God in this world. That is our purpose. That is our purpose of being children of the living God, is to glorify God. When I hear new people come from the community and say they have been shopping for a new church and tell me that this is one of the friendliest churches they've been to and they want to stay and make this their church home. You see, to me that is showing love, and that is glorifying God. When we help people in our community, the victims of our community, those who are hungry, what we're doing is we show that they matter and that we love them. And that glorifies God. When our youth go to the retirement center to play bingo with those who are lonely, or the EYC takes sandwiches to the Austin Street shelter to the hungry, what we're showing is that they matter, that we care. And that is showing love. And in turn, that is glorifying God. When we are there to listen to a hurting neighbor, just sitting and listening to the pain they're going through, or the anguish, what we're telling them is, I care. I care for you. And that's showing love. And that is glorifying God. In the year of evangelism here at Holy Trinity, you have heard me say over and over and over again that we need to share our story. That's what evangelism is telling your story. And we do. And it's a very important part of evangelism. But the next thing we need to do also is to share our love with one another. After all, what is good is the story if there's no love behind it? Every Christ follower must be intentional and growing in their relationship with one another as well as God. And the church must be intentional about helping people grow in their faith and their love of their neighbor. This is why you hear me preach all the time, over and over and over, about love. No, I'm not some hippie. Maybe a little bit. No, I'm kidding. I'm not a hippie. I just want to tell you what's so important. This is why we have so many different ministries at Holy Trinity by the Lake. It is here to help you develop the skills to be able to talk to people and to be able to love them. When we knit blankets for people in the hospital and they're sick, when we're praying for them here, when we come together, that is loving and glorifying God. Can we do it? I do not believe that Jesus would have asked us to do this if we were incapable of doing it. Many years ago, as I said, my priest made a very bold statement from the pulpit. One that was a wake-up call to me, and obviously I have never forgotten. It gives me a checklist of myself every day, and I'm thankful that he did it. As followers of Christ, we should always share what we deeply desire ourselves. We should share what we deeply desire for ourselves, the love of God. We should be given this to one another. We are followers of Christ, and we need to show that. We don't need stickers on the back of our cars telling the world that we're Christian. It's okay. But there needs to be love behind it to back it up. We don't need t-shirts that have maybe a symbol or a picture on it. They're great. But there's nothing without the love behind it. We don't need those cute sayings as we're out running in the community and people are hollering them out, or on Facebook as you see all these sweet quotes that are all the time about God. They're great, don't get me wrong. But they're worthless if love is not behind it. What we need, each and one of us need, is the love of Christ inside us. What we need is to share that love of Christ with others. And what we need to do is make sure that people understand that they are loved by God. And can we do it? Again, yes we can. Because after all, they will know that we are Christians by our love. Amen.